The fact that we have different players. We just talked about the Saudis. We're going to talk about the Palestinians now. Around 2 weeks ago, the Secretary General of the Palestinian Liberation Organization, they are not liberal. Sorry about that. Once again, it's Chad's fault because I can't see with this thing in my face. He met with the Saudi National Security Advisor, Musaid al-Ibn in Riyadh, to discuss their demands as part of any U.S.-Saudi Israeli agreement. And as reported in the BBC, several of the demands were as follows. One, transferring parts of Area C of the West Bank to the administration of the Palestinian Authority. A complete cessation of Israeli settlement growth in the West Bank. Resuming Saudi financial support of the PA, which Saudi Arabia just recently offered to resume financial aid to the Palestinian Authority, which decreased over the last decade and was completely cut off in 2021. Reopening the U.S. consulate in Jerusalem and resuming U.S. broker negotiations between the Israelis and the Palestinians where they stopped in 2014. So those are the players that are really talking about the demands that they want right now. So now let's talk a little bit about Biden and Netanyahu. We know there's been, I guess, I don't know if you want to say the word animosity, or there's definitely been a little bit of tension, maybe between the two. But the long-awaited, anticipated meeting between Biden and Netanyahu took place on the sidelines of the General Assembly. Very good meeting. The leaders reaffirmed their strong commitment to the U.S.-Israel relationship and discussed issues of shared concerns, including the Saudi-Israel normalization and concessions for the Palestinians, Israel's integration into the region, combating the Iranian threat, judicial reform as well. Netanyahu thanked Biden for his continuous commitment to prevent Iran from achieving nuclear weapon capability and stated that, quote, our shared goals can best be achieved by a credible military threat, crippling sanctions, and supporting the people who oppose the regime. In addition, Netanyahu has had trouble at home dealing with his judicial reform. You know, his foreign policy, when he's out there, that's really where he truly shines. And he met with Zelensky to clarify the work that Israel is doing to help Ukraine. He met with Turkish President Erdogan, where they agreed on a series of official visits and increasing bilateral cooperation on energy and trade. Very important issue for the Israelis. Netanyahu also met with the Chancellor of Germany. He met with the Paraguayan president, and he also discussed opening up the Congolese embassy in Jerusalem with the Democratic Republic of Congo president as well. More and more countries slowly but surely seem to be opening up embassies in Jerusalem. Iran, the big thing that deals with keeping Israelis up at night. So ahead of its meeting that it just recently had at the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, and if anybody wants to comment or has a question, please, because I only have so many pages to go. They released a report ahead of its Board of Governors meeting on Iran's continuing of nuclear ambitions. So part of it highlighted the positive development that Iran has slowed its pace of enriching uranium to 60%. However, the report also detailed how Iran has significantly increased its stockpiles of 5% and 20% enriched uranium, which can easily be enriched to higher levels, and revealed that Iran is still not complying with oversight requirements by denying visas to the IAEA inspectors and blocking access to key sites. During a recent meeting in Vienna, the IAEA Board of Governors did not take any action on Iran. The Director General, Rafael Grossi, lamented that the lack of international focus on Iran's ongoing nuclear program is something to be concerned about. The US, UK, France, and Germany did issue a joint statement threatening action at the next IAEA Board of Governors meeting if Iran continues to fail in terms of its ability to cooperate with IAEA inspectors. There has been other movement on the U.S. side on Iran. The U.S. sanctioned recently a network of actors in Iran, China, Russia, and Turkey for supporting Tehran's military aircraft and drones program. The drones program, which we also know is taking a real active presence in Ukraine, with the drones being sent from Iran to Russia. The U.S. House of Representatives also returned and voted overwhelmingly to adopt the Fight Crime Act in a 403-8 vote. It was co-authored by the ranking member, Mike McCall, and the ranking member, Gregory Meeks. This bill urges the administration, the Biden administration, to seek the extension of UN restrictions on Iran's ballistic missile program that is set to expire next month, and to tighten U.S. missile sanctions. So when they did the original JCPOA, they had sunset policies. And one of the sunset policies that we see now is on Iran's U.S. ballistic missile program, which is, of course, of great concern to Israel, and if they continue with their development, to Europe and as well as beyond. The Justice Department also made public this week that it seized almost 1 million barrels of Iranian crude oil tied to the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, and which was exported in violation of U.S. sanctions. The seizure took place earlier this year, but was only officially acknowledged now due to Iranian threats of retaliation of that siege. The company at fault was sentenced, just so you see what the Justice Department is doing, to 3 years of corporate probation, a fine of $2.5 million, as well as some other stuff as well. In terms of Iran, we saw recently, of course, that the Biden administration formally issued a sanctions waiver to allow the release of Iranian funds held in South Korea as part of the hostage deal with the Iranian regime. Under that deal, 5 Americans, hostages, were freed, and the U.S. gave Iran $6 billion in frozen assets, as well as the release of 5 Iranian arrested by the U.S. for aiding Iran's weapons development and acting as unregistered agents of the Iranian government. The funds are now being held in a bank in Qatar, where the Biden administration claims that the U.S. will ensure that they are only used for humanitarian purposes. There has been some criticism of the deal on the Republican side, members of Congress, President Trump as well, but Senator Bob Menendez, who is the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, also had some concerns as well. Well, yes, Senator Menendez, who was just recently charged with, yes, stashing some gold coins. I'm going to skip on Abbas and his talk on Ashkenazi Jews who are not the real descendants of Israelis, and that Jews were slaughtered in the Holocaust not for their identity but for their social roles as moneylenders. I don't know if anybody heard Abbas talk about that recently. Which, of course, as we are here in Yom Kippur and we're, doing the prayers at the rabbi, and we are repeating those names of the centers of where Jews were massacred, to hear the leader of the Palestinian Authority perpetuate these harmful anti-Semitic tropes is of great concern. Deborah Lipstadt, who's the U.S. Special Envoy to combat anti-Semitism, slammed his, quote, hateful anti-Semitic remarks and said the speech maligned the Jewish people and distorted the Holocaust as well. Several members of Congress who have actually come out to Long Island for our pro-Israel political giving group, if anybody's ever interested in getting involved in politics. Senator Jackie Rosen, who was from Nevada, came up with, spoke about the offensive comments, as well as Richie Torres from the Bronx, who said, quote, "One reason the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is nowhere near a resolution. The bar is so low that a Holocaust-denying anti-Semite like Mahmoud Abbas is considered a moderate when measured against the genocidal anti-Semites of Hamas, whose founding charter calls for the destruction of Israel. That's our guy, Richie Torres, who's been a great advocate for the Jewish people in the U.S.-Israel relationship. I'm going to just talk very briefly about what's going on in Israel right now in terms of what we are seeing with the judicial reforms. So I've been fortunate to be in Israel twice in the past year. Was at two of the rallies, wanted to see what it was like, regardless of which side you are on, to be in the presence of 100,000 Israelis waving Israeli flags is something to be seen. Interesting dynamic how I like to call it the center or the center left have taken the Israeli flag to make it so that they are the Zionists, they are the pro-Israel people in this cause, and it's worked in many ways. A little bit different than what we saw, a few years ago here, with the protests that were, whether it was with George Floyd or some of the other things that we saw. The movement of taking this Israeli flag is something that is truly reasonable. That's one of the things that they're talking about in the thing. So you have a government that's there right now, that's a center-right government with some extremes for the fringe right, that want to create something new in terms of the judiciary in that country. What's important to note is that many people in the country, regardless of what side they're on, do believe in judicial reform. This is something that's been talked about for a very, very long time. The thing that they weren't looking at for some of this stuff is as far as the current government wants to go. And yes, the current government has said that they have been elected, which is true, and they do have a majority in power right now. But when they were campaigning, they weren't talking about many of these things that they're talking now on the judicial reform. Thank you, Dr. Freund. They are talking about a couple of things. One, they're talking about judicial appointments. Two, they're talking about what's called reasonableness. It's very hard to say that 3 times quickly. And they're also talking about majority on the vote. So for instance, if there is a piece of legislation that goes out that the Supreme Court says is no longer viable, if the Knesset has 61 votes, which is a majority, then that overrides the judiciary. The problem in Israel is they don't have a constitution, so they don't really have these rules and regulations. Yes. So what the rabbi was just saying was he was talking about that there's no checks and balances. But so the checks have been the judiciary. And there's a whole, I'm trying to kind of pinpoint it. The Israeli legal system, incorporated concepts from the British mandate. It's taking it from Jewish law, as well as the Israeli legal system that has kind of grown over time. On the Jewish law side, this is something the American Jewish Committee put out. Long history of emphasizing reasonableness. This is the key word right now that we just saw. And fairness in legal decision making. The principle of derech eretz, literally meaning the way of the land, in Jewish law encompasses ethical conduct and reasonable behavior. In terms of British common law, which also had a significant impact on the development of Israeli law, also talked about the reasonableness standard. The British legal system, with its emphasis on reasonableness, I'm going to talk a little bit about that more in a second, fairness and the reasonable person standard has been influential in many of the legal jurisdictions. And then the Israeli legal system further incorporated many of these concepts through the adoption of the British legal principles during the Mandate between 1920 and 1948. During this time, the British Mandate authorities introduced English law into the legal framework of the land that would later become the State of Israel. The British legal system's concepts, including reasonableness standard, were thus integrated in the Israeli jurisdiction. So, over time, the Israeli courts have continued to develop and refine the reasonableness standard based on Israeli case law, legal scholarship, and comparative legal analysis. The standard has been applied across various areas of Israeli law, such as tort law, administrative law, contract law, and to assess the reasonableness of actions, decisions, and behavior. As I said before, the American Jewish Committee has a whole thing written on this. So once again, so what do the proponents of reasonableness legislation say? So, and this was the piece of legislation that just got passed by a vote of 64 to 56. Legislation was drawn up by a party from the religious Zionism. The law would specifically prohibit Israeli courts from using what's called the reasonableness doctrine to review decisions made by the Israeli cabinet, government ministers, and other unspecified elected officials as determined by law. So the proponents of this legislation, they argue that the current standard for judicial intervention is too subjective, and because it allows the high court to subvert government authority, it contradicts the rule of law. Further proponents say that such a broad judicial review of administrative action is also not seen in other democratic countries. Elected officials, they say that they are chosen by the voters to make these decisions on matters that are great or small, and it's not for the judges to question these values. This has been particularly sensitive in regard to the appointment of government ministers, such as this decision that recently was decided by the High Court to block Shas Chairman Aryeh Deri. Aryeh Deri was appointed to be the Interior and Health Minister using the reasonableness doctrine. Reasonableness, I can't say it 10 times quickly. The proponents argue that it is the Prime Minister's job to select members of the cabinet, and it is not the role of the judiciary to interfere in the executive's ability to govern. So what the court said was that Aryeh Deri, who was convicted, and said that, during this conviction, that he would not seek to be in any other type of elected office, MK, a higher office. Then all of a sudden Netanyahu wanted to appoint him, and the Supreme Court said, no, that's unreasonable. The opponents of the reasonableness legislation have said this, once again from the American Jewish Committee, because they write it up so well. Critics of the legislation, including Israel's Attorney General, say that, quote, reasonableness is an essential standard in the Israeli legal system and one of the few measures that the judiciary has to check on the excess of Israel's heavily centralized executive branch of government. Canceling that standard, they say, would remove the only tool for reviewing arbitrary and highly unreasonable decisions by the government. This is made more important in countries without a written constitution like Israel. They continue to say that this would harm law enforcement, other agencies, including unreasonable appointments, as we just saw with Aryeh Deri, right, who once again, despite his past criminal convictions, and as part of the 2022 plea bargain where he promised not to return to public life. The High Court ruled that Deri's criminal history was unreasonable in the extreme and allowed the application of the reasonableness doctrine to disqualify him from serving as minister. And so that is the fight between those two sides of the reasonableness aspect of it. Yes, Rabbi? Oh, just 5 minutes left? Okay. So the answer is, we assume the answer is yes, right? So the question was, does the judicial reform have any effect on Netanyahu's legal problems? So within 5 minutes, one of the things that they also want to do is how you appoint judges. Right now, the judges are appointed by committee. It's members of the Supreme Court. It's some people from the Bar Association, and then some representatives from the ruling party and the opposition. And so what Netanyahu and the coalition is looking to do is that they basically would almost have the right to appoint who would be the next Supreme Court justices. If that is the case, then, they're kind of, packing the bench with people that would support him. So there have been some people that have talked about, some people that have been talked about being the next Supreme Court justices there that have been very much on Netanyahu's side in terms of this. One of the reasons why they're also doing the legislation, we recently had an Israeli diplomat that was out here on the island, and the issue of illegal, immigrants, you would say, that the Somali immigrants, the migrants, whatever you want to call them, that have been in Tel Aviv. There are definitely people that want to expel them, and in the most recent, one of the most recent times of appointing judges, there were, I think, 3 conservative judges that were appointed to the Israeli Supreme Court. It could be 4, but you get the gist. And when the case came about basically expelling these individuals, those conservative judges actually ruled with the rest of the court, saying that you couldn't send them back into a war zone. It's against human rights to do that. And some of the people that were on the right, the right in the Israeli Knesset, were very upset about that. So then they were trying to pass these, different laws to see what else they can do to kind of shape the Israeli, Supreme Court. It is a very divisive thing. Netanyahu, I think, has taken a step back. He says right now that, let's basically stick with what we did with the reasonableness aspect of it, and really now try and get together in terms of having much more of a supermajority to basically pass any additional reforms. I was with a senior member of the Likud just last week that was here for the UN General Assembly. These questions came up. I thought he had some very good points about, once again, for any laws that would be overturned by the judiciary, that it should be a majority of the court. Any laws that would be or anything that the Knesset would have that would overturn what the Israeli Supreme Court is saying, that would need to be by a supermajority, as well, instead of the 1 vote plus. Some people on the left, their concerns is that, when you have some people in this government, that, might be against certain women's rights or LGBTQ rights, that if you have a Knesset vote of 61 or more, that those rights of those individuals can be pulled back. When I was with the people from Likud, saying Likud, regardless of whatever else you might want to think, it's pretty liberal. I mean, the Speaker of the Knesset is a member of Likud, and he's gay. So from that perspective, we'll see. Dr. Freund has one more question. In 1 minute. So the question basically was that the Palestinians really had no say in the Abraham Accords. The Palestinians might have more of a say with the Saudis. So the Saudis have said from day one, if we want to have normalization with the Israelis, that there has to be some movement on the Palestinian side. So we'll have to see. The question is that if they're put into a position where there are certain concessions that the Israelis need to make for the Palestinians, will they take that for normalization with the most influential and wealthiest Muslim nation in the world? It's something that I guess we'll discuss next year. Not 95, 11. 11 out of 15, but close. Listen, the other thing about the Supreme Court is that it's very Ashkenazi based. I mean, when they talk about having a more diversified, I mean, they do have a Muslim, that's on there, but where is the Sephardic representation that should be on the Supreme Court as well? That's another issue. So you can see with Netanyahu's coalition that there are, a lot of Sephardic base as well. That's also of great concern. And I get it, because half of Israel is Sephardic. So. No, you're. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day. Gemar Chatima Tova.
Okay, everybody, welcome. Good afternoon, Saharayim Tovim. You feeling psyched? Thank you, Todd. You got us going, got the juices flowing, the blood going. We're going to begin Mincha, the afternoon service. Stretch for a moment. Let's rise. We're going to begin on page 361. What, you can't hear me? You must be able to hear me. Cut what? Oh. Okay. All right. So we do have to start only because of timing, but for those listening on stream, you're going to be cut out for a moment because technically they have to change the link over from Todd Talks to Mincha. So you might lose like a minute of the service, or forgive me, but because